What's up guys, Lifting here. Welcome to my Righteous Fire, mainly Marauder preliminary build guide. This is the build I've been playing the last few days on stream, and I've always been a big fan of Righteous Fire. I played it back in Invasion as well, and it is such a good build. In this preliminary guide, I'll show you the most important things that you need in order to get started yourself, such as the skill tree, the skill gem setups, and the gear that is required for this build. A full build guide will be out when Act 4 hits, but until then you will have to make do with this. The build itself is very tanky. It has a very high life pool. Throughout the skill tree we reach 190 to 200% increased maximum life. It has a very high armor count, and if you use your flasks correctly, you will have 100% fire resistances all the time, which is pretty good. Besides that, it deals a ton of damage and you will be able to clear the highest level of maps. And I know you guys are gonna ask this, can this kill Atziri? The answer to that is yes, it can very well kill Atziri. But one thing to keep in mind is that in order to run this build, you need to buy or find yourself a Rise of the Phoenix, and that's the main thing. It isn't that expensive. 2 exalts is the normal price in Bloodlines and Torment, as far as I am aware. So guys, let me quickly explain to you how Righteous Fire works. Basically, it is a spell you activate and then things will take burning damage around you. And the more life you have, the more damage you deal. As you can see here, enemies burn for 50% of your maximum life per second as fire damage. So that means that the more total life you have, the more damage you're going to deal. And that's why Righteous Fire is so cool. It basically gives you more damage the more tanky you are. What a lovely combination. But you burn for 90% of your maximum life per second as fire damage as well. So that means if I activate this and I have no high fire resistance or no high life regen, let's see what happens. I'm going to activate it now, and as you can see, my life starts to decline. And the reason it's falling this low is because I already have a really high life regeneration. I have 656. If I press my ruby flask here, which will take my fire resistances higher, like this, I start to regen life because I have 97% fire resistance, or it gives me that. So your ruby flasks becomes your healing flasks. Now if I activate my vitality gem, you can see the life still declines, but it declines slower than what it did before because we have higher life regeneration. If I activate my Purity of Fire, which will increase our fire resistance, oh, all of a sudden we're not degenning anymore, we're actually regenerating life. And now if I then click my Ruby Flask again to take my fire resistances up, we're basically regenerating the full amount because we have 100% fire resistances, which is just incredibly cool. It's so cool, and as you can see, we are actually able to sustain this and actually regen life as well. So that's how Righteous Fire works. I'm not going to explain all the other skills, but Righteous Fire can be a little complex, so I felt like that I should do that. Just keep in mind you need that fire resistance, life regen, and you of course need Rise of the Phoenix to get that high fire resistance. So before you have Rise of the Phoenix, you cannot run Righteous Fire, and you can use Rise of the Phoenix at level 65. I suggest you level with Flame Blast until then, or Face Breakers or something like that. The good thing about leveling with Face Breakers is that you pick up so much life, so it'll be tanky enough. And the good thing about leveling with Flame Blast is that you pick up things such as Arsonist, Elemental Damage, and Amplifier, those kinds of things. So the setups we're using is Righteous Fire, increased area of effect to, well, increase the area that Righteous Fire covers, concentrated effect to deal more damage, and increased burning damage to deal more damage. But besides that, we are using the other damage setup we're using is Vol Molten Shell, Blood Magic, so we have the mana to cast it, and increased duration. And Vol Molten Shell actually deals a ton of damage, and one of the reasons for that is of course that Vol Molten Shell stacks with elemental damage, fire damage, and so on, just as Righteous Fire. So it's a really nice combination, and it adds more armor as well, so it makes you more tanky. We're then using the utility skill Cyclone, or Cyclone is normally attack, but what we use it for is utility. With Cyclone, and I have linked it with Blood Magic by the way, so we spend a life instead of mana. I have linked Cyclone with life gain on hit as an additional layer of defense, curse on hit, and flammability. So the thing that happens here is that every time we attack an enemy, we automatically cast flammability on them and they take more fire damage. One thing to keep in mind here is that if you can get a quality elemental weakness, then that will be better. I couldn't at this time, but I will get one of those to increase the damage. If you have a 6 link, the really cool thing would be to have curse on hit with both flammability and elemental weakness. That would of course require you to either pick up Whispers of Doom so enemies can have one additional curse, or find an item that gives you the ability to have where enemies can have one additional curse. So if you have a 6 link, get yourself that extra curse, elemental weakness, or flammability, depending on what you get. And the other cool thing about Cyclone here is that it is an attack, and since I am wearing a ring that adds 8 to 7 cold damage, it doesn't have to be a ring, it can be your weapon or your amulet or just whatever that adds some kind of elemental damage that isn't fire damage. Because of that, we have Elemental Equilibrium. Elemental Equilibrium, when we hit them with that small amount of cold damage, will make them more resistant to cold damage, but it will make them less resistant to fire damage. So we actually deal a ton of damage by using Elemental Equilibrium. So Cyclone works by spreading curses, adding a defensive layer, life gain on hit, and also the fact that you can't be stunned when you're cycloning, and spreading the curses and Elemental Equilibrium. So pretty cool, it's a really nice setup. And I need to give a shout out to Niffler here, because I think it was in his guide I read about that. For auras, we're using Purity of Fire, and that is, as I said guys, so we can sustain the Righteous Fire. We're using Vitality to sustain and get that life regen, and Determination to increase our armor count. Right now we have about 4,000, with Determination we have 7,000, so it's okay. When we press our Granite Flask here, we have 81, or we have 81% chance or reduced physical damage. We are using Cast when Damage Taken as well, level 9. Enduring Cry, this I can level to 10 I believe, I just haven't done it yet. Immortal Call level 9 and Increased Duration. You of course need to level that as high as possible. It is a support gem, it isn't restricted by the maximum level requirements of Cast when Damage Taken. Lastly, we are using Vengeance with Blind, and I have Stun in here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put Leap Slam in here. I just haven't done it yet to give some more mobility to the build. And that's basically the skill gem setup, guys. Now, before we continue with the skill tree, guys, let me quickly talk about flasks here again. I already talked about ruby flasks. These are your healing potions. But I feel like I should mention that it's pretty important to have the immunity to curses on at least one of these. Because if enemies are casting either vulnerability, elemental weakness, or flammability on you, your elemental resistances will be lowered, or you will take more damage over time from vulnerability. And that means that you won't be able to counter the degen of Righteous Fire, and then you need to disable it, or you pop this flask that will make you immune to curses. If you need to disable Righteous Fire, or if you need to instantly regen some life, I would recommend you also have a Seething or Bubbling Hallowed or Divine Life Flask, because, well, it's always nice to have these for these panic situations where you have to regen a lot of life instantly, and also more importantly, this Flask of Dousing will disable your Righteous Fire. So if I again turn on my Righteous Fire, the only way for me to disable this is if Righteous Fire takes me to 1 HP, then it will turn off automatically, it will not kill you. Or if I use this Flask of Dousing. So if I click this again, nothing happens, it will not disable, but if I use my Flask of Dousing here, it turns off. And that's of course important, that will allow you to regen again, it will counter the degen effect. I also feel like you should use a Granite Flask to get that armor count up to help with physical damage mitigation, and always, and this goes for every build, you should have at least one flask that has the off staunching to remove bleed effects. Now I would preferably want to get this ruby flask with the warding suffix again to remove curses, but I've just not had the luck yet with crafting that. So For items, we can briefly go over this because it's pretty simple. As I said, Rise of the Phoenix, you need that to get that maximum fire resistances, and it's the only unique you actually need. If you want it, if you have trouble with getting enough life regen, then you can use things such as the Bloodbanes. Every time you kill an enemy, there's a chance to get a frenzy charge, and per frenzy charge you'll get 1% of life regenerated per second. So that can be nice if you don't have enough regen and you just want to get started with Righteous Fire as you reach level 65. But if you have enough regen, I suggest using a pair of boots with high flat life instead to scale your maximum amount of life. Besides that, you only really need yellow items or rare items that has life and enough resistances to cap every other resistance, of course. For the weapon, getting fire damage and elemental damage is what you want. If you can afford it, get yourself a Doriani's Catalyst, the scepter that will increase your elemental damage by 100%. It's really nice. Unfortunately, I can't afford it yet. So basically, life and resistance is what you want, and of course armor if you can, but that's like a third priority. It's pretty simple for the items. Now let's talk about the skill tree, dudes. Alright guys, so I'm gonna go quickly over the skill tree, and keep in mind the most important things for this build is a high life pool, life regeneration and fire resistances, and all of these are important in order for you to sustain the Righteous Fire skill. Otherwise it will burn yourself to death. So you need a high life regeneration, and as you guys can see, I have 193% increased maximum life now. I could spend more points if I wanted to, but the build is actually pretty much complete at 104 points. I have a 12.5 life regeneration, and you can go lower than that, but I feel like this is where I'd like to be at with the current gear that I have and while using Vitality. So I'm not going to show you point for point how to level this, but I can show you quickly that I would suggest that if you're leveling with Flame Blast as I did, to of course go in this direction, you can't really go in any other. Pick up the life, pick up Barbarism up here, pick up Arsonist to help with the damage. Then go up here, pick the elemental damage and blast radius, pick up the more life if you feel like you need it at that point, and then go up in this direction and pick up Firewalker and Elemental Dominion. If you already have a high level character that you want to spec into Righteous Fire, the most important thing for you to spend your points on first would be life regeneration, and these are all the ones that are marked here by this teal circlet. So Warrior's Blood, this, Armor Mastery, Arsonist, Master the Arena, which is really good since it increases the range of Cyclone as well, Golem's Blood, and the remaining skill node here, and Shaper, and so on and so on. Oh, and one thing I should mention here is that Alchemist should not be underestimated. I would suggest you take this pretty soon after you transition into Righteous Fire. It is Alchemist that will allow you to have 100% fire resistance. This will make your potions or your ruby flasks get to that level. So it is pretty important in my opinion. Now, if you were to spend more skill points, I would suggest you pick up Heart of Flame up here to boost the damage of your Righteous Fire. And lastly, you could decide to pick up more life points down here. Keep in mind that your life regeneration is based on your total amount of maximum life. So the more total life you have, the more life regen you have, and the easier it is going to be to sustain your Righteous Fire. So this is the skill tree, and I'm of course gonna leave a link to it in the description, but just keep in mind the most important thing is for you to be able to sustain the Righteous Fire that you have a high life pool, high life regeneration, and high fire resistances. And that's it for the build, guys. I hope this proves to be sufficient to get you guys going. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them below, or if you want to see the build in live action or get the opportunity to ask me questions live, come to my Twitch stream. I'm gonna post a link just down below. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?